So right now, I would like to introduce um, Ben Yoskovitz, who is the founding partner of Highline Beta, which is a hybrid corporate venture studio and venture capital firm. Before Highline Beta, Ben was a vice president of product at Verage Cell, a venture-backed startup, and then a VP of product at Go Instant, which was acquired by Salesforce in 2012. And going back before that, Ben was also a founding partner of Year One Labs, an early stage accelerator. Before that, he was also a founder and CEO of Standout Jobs, which was sold in 2010. Ben has been in the internet web space since the mid-90s, since 1996, clearly with such rich experience. It's no wonder that Ben decided to write a book to share his knowledge and experience with our younger generation, and co-authored Lean Analytics. Use data to build a better startup faster. So I'll pass the time, 5 minutes, to Ben for him to present his work, and then we will begin our one-on-one conversation from there. Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it. And thank you for having me. I did prepare slides. So let me just share my screen quickly so people can see that. And I will attempt to go through this very quickly. This is Lean Analytics in 5 minutes. What metrics should we focus on, when, and why? Of course, you're welcome to read the book. There's my contact information for anybody that ever wants to reach out. There's my email address, now my X handle. I'm on LinkedIn. I just recently, it's been a year where I started writing a new newsletter called Focused Chaos. And people are welcome to subscribe to that. Product management, analytics, venture studios, and a whole host of other things. So lean analytics, or analytics in general, metrics, is a big topic, but I've got 3 things to share with people. And then I know, Paul, you'll ask me a bunch of great questions and we can go into any number of details. So the first thing is you have to understand the difference between a good and a bad metric. And a good metric has 4 key criteria. The first thing is that it is understandable. So we're looking for simple numbers to help explain what's going on. So if you're busy explaining the data and the complexity behind the data, you won't be busy acting on the data, and that's a problem. The second thing is a good metric. So think about the metrics you're tracking in your own startup today and use this to say, am I tracking the right things? A good metric is usually comparative, so what we mean by that is usually over time. So think of something like active users. They say I have 1,000 active users on my app. I don't really know if that's a good number or a bad number. If I tell you last month I had 100 active users, and now this month I have 1,000 and I have 10x that number, that starts to suggest to you that I've been acquiring more users, and that's a good thing. So usually when we're looking at what is a good metric, we want it to be comparative. More than that, actually, we want it to be a ratio or a rate. So if I just use my simple example, last month I had 100 users, now I have 1,000 users. But last month, I only had 200 people sign up and 100 of them became active. So I had 50% of my people become active users. This month, I had 1,000 users that are active, but I had 100,000 people sign up. So in fact, only 1% became active. So a lot more people showed up, but they didn't stick around with the product. So ratios and rates, percentages usually reveal a lot more information than just comparing raw data. And finally, and most importantly, a good metric, a metric that you would focus on, has to change your behavior, or at least give you the opportunity to do that. So the golden rule of metrics is this: if a metric won't change how you behave, it's a bad metric. Now, that doesn't mean you don't track it, because we track all kinds of data. But the key to using data to build a business is figuring out what data to actually focus on so that you can make decisions. So if you look at a number and it's going up or it's going down or it's staying the same and you don't know what you would do, that's not a number that you should be focusing on. The reality is we all love vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are bad. And this is Narcissus looking into his reflection in the water and dying there. These are numbers that go up and to the right. The number of users we have is a vanity metric. How many followers you have on LinkedIn or Facebook is a vanity metric. How much capital you've raised is a vanity metric, because it doesn't tell me if the business is succeeding or not succeeding. So after you know what a good metric is, the next thing you have to figure out is what stage you're at in your business. In the book, we define 5 stages: empathy, stickiness, virality, revenue, and scale. And essentially every company goes through these stages. They're all a little bit different, but they go through these stages. And there are gates that you need to go through to get through these stages. Everybody starts at empathy. So many of you at the earliest stages, you're just trying to validate if there's a real problem. That's learning about the user, learning about the customer, validating that they have a problem. Most of what you're tracking here is qualitative through user interviews that you're doing. Once you get through that stage, you go and you build your first version of the product, the MVP. And now here we start to track stickiness, engagement. So these are engagement metrics. And really, to get through this stage, you've figured out how to solve the problem in a way that users will adopt, keep using, and pay for in some way. If you can get through that stage, you go to virality, which is really growth. We use the word virality, but we mean growth. How do you go from early adopters to later adopters? And then if you can get through that stage, then we go to the revenue stage. Now, this doesn't mean you don't charge from day one. You might have a B2B software application and you're charging customers right away. This revenue stage, what we really mean here is the economic engine of the business is working. So the metrics we're starting to look at are things like lifetime value over cost of acquisition, payback period. So I have to validate, once I know I can get customers, they use it, I can get more customers. Can I make the math of this business work? And then finally scale, which is really how do we grow this company? Now, the reality is most startups fail at stickiness. They build something, but people don't really want it. People don't really use it. They don't get enough value. Many companies get past this stage. They raise more money, they keep going, but in fact, they've actually failed because they're not building a product that is in fact sticky. And then I put this little thing here where I said product market fit, PMF, is here somewhere between virality and revenue. I see a lot of companies or founders say they launch the product, they have 5 customers, and they say, I have product market fit. That's nonsense. Product market fit comes much later. Happy to answer questions about that. So what is a good metric? Next, I know what stage I'm at, and you have to be honest about what stage you're at. And then the third thing you have to figure out is what business model you're actually running. Business models in the book, we sort of mapped and defined 6 of them. Business models are much more complicated than this, but you actually have to know what business you're in. And the way to do this is to map your business. Now, this is not terribly complicated, but more than 5 minutes. This is kind of what that looks like. And there's a link in the top right-hand corner because I recently wrote a much more detailed blog post about this. But this is what a SaaS customer lifecycle looks like. This is a freemium style business. And why this is so important is you say, I've mapped out all the customer journey of how somebody interacts with my business. And now if I know what stage I'm at, and I know what my business looks like and how I make money and how I grow and acquire users, I can triangulate on those triangulate on those 2 things and really figure out where to focus, because you can't focus on everything at the same time. So if you know what a good metric looks like, you know what business you're in, and you know what stage you're at, you look for what we call the one metric that matters. Now, that doesn't mean you're only tracking one thing. It means at any given point in time, how do you focus on the right thing? So if you're a very early stage SaaS business, you're not really worried about how to upsell. You might not even be really worried about whether people are going to pay for your product today. You just need people to get to the website, sign up, and start using the product. If you're a much later stage company, presumably you've already figured out the top of the funnel. You now have to figure out how to upsell and grow account value. So this is not saying focus literally on only one thing, but it is encouraging you to focus on what actually matters to help your business scale. And that's it. I don't know if that was quite 5 minutes, but there you go. Again, there's my contact information. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I hope that very rapid walk through of lead analytics was helpful.
No, brilliant. In fact, you underrun your time, so thank you for that, Ben.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful.
So Ben, you've shared some many great images and like chart, and especially the last one with the map one. If the audience would like to get their hands on that, is that the link that you shared earlier? Is that one of your
I
posts?
didn't leave that up for very long, but if people just go to
Mm,
focuschaos.co, they will find that there and
mm,
other versions of it that I've started to create.
right.
I would really recommend every company, every founder, every startup,
Mm,
with your whole team,
mm,
map the business.
mm,
And in the newsletter, I walk through sort of ways of how to take that approach. But if you're in a room, get out a whiteboard. If you're virtual, use virtual whiteboard.
mm,
But what happens when you map that whole business with your team is
mm,
usually you'll realize people think of the business very differently.
mm.
Even a 5-person team might be thinking about the business in different ways.
Sure.
So mapping allows you to create an alignment and say, oh, that's how the whole business works. And
Mm,
these are parts of the business we maybe haven't got to yet, but
mm,
we think they're going to work that way. And now you can
mm,
focus in on where the problem spots are
mm,
and figure out what experiments to run to try to fix those problems.
mm. And so that would be how you would get your operational metrics, right? To start
Exactly.
measuring, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I know you sort of mentioned it, and comparative metrics. Technically, what it means, it's like, if you want to be the fastest, 100-meter sprint dash runner, you need to keep a record of, and you need to know who else are running faster than you, so that you could claim to be the fastest one, right? So in that sense, if let's say you've got like an inexperienced founders who know all this, they know, okay, they've done the the mapping, but if they can't access some of these benchmarks, these metrics benchmarks that are being shared by successful companies in the market, then how do they go about um, understanding what are the goals that they should target for?
Yeah, it benchmarks always one of the toughest things to figure out.
Mm,
Luckily, there are more and more businesses, investors, and others publishing their own data.
right.
So you go and start to look for it. I've actually used ChatGPT,
Mm,
say, what is a good conversion rate for XYZ? And it will start
mm,
to give you general info. And it says, well, it depends on the type of business you're in. And so, okay,
mm,
well, I'm an e-commerce business.
mm,
Okay, well, this might. So you can start to, just because of the sharing of data,
mm,
start to look for benchmarks.
mm,
So I think that's one thing that you can do. I don't,
mm,
and you should do that just to get a gauge.
mm,
But at the same time, I think you have to figure out what those benchmarks look like for your business.
mm,
Because, if somebody says conversion rate from a freemium to paid in B2B SaaS should be 2%.
mm,
Let's say they say that's a benchmark. Well, maybe your business is at 1%, but it's a different vertical, it's a different circumstance, and maybe 1% is good enough to move to the next stage of what you want to focus on, because there's a real risk of saying, oh, I have to get to 2%. So I'm going to just spend all of my time trying to get there, but I get to 1.75. Do I
mm,
shut the company down? Or do I say, well, for now, that's okay? Because often when you keep experimenting and experimenting, you get diminishing returns.
mm, mm,
So
mm,
usually the way I think about that is say, do an experiment, try to have a big improvement. When you start to see smaller and smaller improvements, you've maybe hit a threshold for now, and you need to go and work on a different part of the business to see, and then maybe you can come back to that part after. So benchmarks are
right.
helpful, but I wouldn't use them as law.
Right. And then, so what is your rule of thumbs in terms of the engagement period for that experiment? Like, let's say, you've got a target to hit. It's either you're reaching that target very slowly, or you're not meeting the target? And for how long should you conduct this experiment before you say to yourself, okay, I don't think this is working, let's try something else, let's try the other person's idea of hitting those other sets of metrics and stuff?
Yeah, it's a great question. Of course, funnily enough, the answer to most questions is it depends and it's hard. So it depends and it's hard. That's the answer to the question. But
Right.
what I would say is, when I think about engagement, like I'm trying to increase usage of the product, then really what I'm focused on is what is my frequency of usage that I believe tells me that a user or a customer is getting value. So, and the reason why this is important is, let's say I'm building a social app, let's use dating. I'm building a dating app. Arguably, I need people using that app quite frequently, maybe every day. Let's say, or a messaging app. I mean, a messaging app has to be used daily. So now my experiments can be quite quick, as long as I have enough users to experiment with, because I know the feedback loop is very short. I make a change. Do people send more messages? Do they send less messages? Do they stick around or do they churn, right? So I can, with things that are meant to have a high frequency of usage, my experiments can be often shorter. Now, if I'm building,
makes sense.
If I'm building tax planning software, well, most of us do our taxes once a year. Now, we might be organizing stuff, but if I'm tax planning, that's harder because the cycle time of usage is shorter, and therefore I have to run the experiments longer. And so for me, what I would say, generally speaking, my goal is not to ever build products where the frequency of usage is less than once a month. Like if you're building something that people are only going to use once every year, it's not like Christmas is coming for many people. Stores come out with Christmas, like literal entire stores come out for Christmas decorations. I know that can be a good business, not a business for me, because I can only iterate once a year. So that's why experiment like this hard, but it's dependent on the type of product that you're.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you think the same rules apply when you're pre-product market fit and post-product market fit, or like there are a whole different sets of metrics to measure and to think about once you've hit product market fit, and what would those metrics be in you?
Yeah, so I think the focus definitely changes when you get to product market fit. Where I put product market fit is really between virality and revenue. Right? So what that means is I figured out how to acquire users or customers in a repeatable and scalable way through channels that are working, i.e., I see the market. That's where product market fit is so important. The market is asking me for this thing. It's pulling me. It's using it. It's not 10 customers. I'm seeing that growth in adoption. And that alone to me isn't even product market fit, because if I don't have an underlying business model that I think will work and scale, I could completely fall off a cliff, which you see with a lot of consumer applications. They grow very quickly. You think, oh, I have product market fit. They raise a lot of capital and they can never monetize. Well, then I don't know if that was really product market fit, that I think you created value for users, but you can never figure out how to build a real business. So it's somewhere between things. And so the metrics now you never stop tracking usage. You never stop tracking, like everything you were tracking before, you keep tracking. But what you focus on when you hit product market fit is really growth. It's all the metrics associated with growth. And then right into those revenue metrics would start to be, it depends on your business, right? But revenue per user, MRR, which is monthly recurring revenue, lifetime value, right? So you start to look at those economics and say, well, hey, the users or customers are starting to, hockey stick. Like am I making money or am I losing my shirt here, right? So those are, now again, you still look at usage, because the other thing you see as things start to grow is often later adopters don't behave as well as early adopters, i.e. they're not as good users. The minute we start to, use advertising as an example. So I've got my early adopters, they came to me through my network, perhaps, right? And now I got to go get I got to get more users. So I do ads. People are signing up, but they're dropping faster. The quality of that user is not as good. So I might again, that's why users is a vanity metric, because the number of users keeps going up, but the percentage of active users might be tanking. That's not product market fit. That's fake, not fake, but it's growth that's going to fall off a cliff. You're building a house of cards. So that you really have to understand.
So in that regards, before they hit product market fit, virality and revenue. So fresh founders, inexperienced founders, most times they don't know what they don't know. And a lot of times they won't even know that they're looking at vanity metrics. So how would they identify that those are vanity metrics for the verticals that they're in? And let's say if in another example where if they're trying out something new, and if, let's say, give them the benefit of doubt, this is a new vertical they've just started and they've got nothing to compare of, then how would they know?
Right. So I think on the vanity metrics side, by the way, everybody tracks vanity metrics.
Yes.
Nobody does not, that's a double negative, but nobody does not track them. That's number one. I don't, and most of the time when you see information being reported publicly, the press, or those are vanity metrics. So it's okay. To me, I look at it, and what I say is, if I'm looking at a metric that I'm tracking on my dashboard, and whatever that number does, it goes up, it goes down, it stays the same, I don't know what I'm going to do about it. I.e., let's say the number's going down, and I say, okay, that number's, and usually down means bad, but not always, right? Like churn is, but okay, the number's going down. I don't know, is that good? Is it bad? Do I care? What would I do to try to change it? If I can't come up with an answer to that, it's probably a vanity metric.
Right.
Because the numbers I'm tracking should be numbers that I say, wait a second, that number is having an impact, positively, neutral, or negative on my business. I've got to go do something to try to change the trajectory of that number. So that's number one. And I think number two, on the benchmarking side, before I get to benchmarking, I think about the systems diagram. So let me show that one more time, just because I think we have a couple of minutes. So if you can see this, and I'll talk about it, because I went so fast, because it answers the question. So the way to think about this is every box is sort of a step in the customer journey. Somebody comes in from one of these customer acquisition channels, they're a visitor to the website, they see the trial offer, they sign up, they become a user, right? And then the arrows in from step one to step two to step three, the arrows are really the metrics. So now I say, okay, well, from a visitor to a user, I care about sign up conversion. Now, I don't know what the perfect benchmark is. Do I want 10% signing up, 20%, 5%? But oftentimes I kind of know. So scenario, 0.05% of people are signing up. I don't need to go look at a benchmark to tell me that that's a 10. Right?
Yes.
Here's another number. 65% are signing up. I'm like, that feels pretty darn good. I don't need a benchmark to tell me that that's good. So sometimes the numbers look like that. Now, let's say the number from visitor to user is 6%. Now I'm like, I don't know. Is 6% good? Is 6% bad? So but the map lets me figure out, well, okay, if 6% come through, how many do I have as engaged users? Okay, I've got, let's say I start with 100. I have 6 now. Okay. How many of those become paying customers? And now I
Mm.
measure pay conversion. Okay, well, what's that percentage? Okay, 0. Well, that's no good. So I better go fix that and then go to the top of the funnel. Another 100 people come through, 6. Okay, now 3 are paid. Oh, interesting. Now I have 3 paying customers. Do I feel like I have a business? I know 3 is a small number, but you just multiply the numbers. Does that feel like a good funnel? It's like, it's not the worst funnel in the world.
Mm.
So now I go to the next step, and it's like, well, wait a second. These 3 paid me, but they all left after 1 month. I don't have a real business, right? That now I've looked at churn. So I'm just trying to craft a funnel. Again, I want to understand where I should vaguely be on the benchmark side, but I need to figure out what my funnel looks like first and what my system looks like first before I can start poking at it to try to fix pieces of it. So I think that's how you start to try to think about it as logically as you can through those steps. Another example, 10 people show up and 5 of them convert. I'm like, 50%, that's amazing, right? But I can never get more than 10 people to show up. I don't have a real business, right? But
Yep.
Again, like this just helps me identify, I think of this like it's a little bit like biology and mechanics at the same time, right? It's
Yep.
not a perfect mechanical system. It's a little bit like a human system where I take some vitamins here. I'm not sure if that helped me over here.
Yep.
Also kind of mechanical at the same time.
Yes, sure. And this whole exercise mapping has the word and definition mapping into it. So it suggests that, like I always like to use this analogy, of trying to map out your most efficient journey towards a destination. So in that regard, on the destination context, do you think that all, even if you're a first-time founder, should think about their destination, which in this case, an exit strategy from day one? Because otherwise, how would they then know how what is the most efficient route to map out for, in order to navigate to reach that destination, right? So, and without doing such exercise, how would they even plan out their financial strategies? What benchmarks, to look for, and also to get the fundraising strategy to support that financial strategy. To in other words, to like how fast can those money help them to reach the destination faster. So obviously we're now talking in the context of startup. So venture capital is the default setting. But if do you now think that in that context, in that regard, that an exit strategy is important to think about in the first place?
So I guess I would say yes and no. So I think exits, let me say the no side. So the no side is when somebody is pitching me their startup, I'm never going to look at the slide that says, and we could exit to ABC. It's like, yeah, maybe you could, maybe you can't. There's probably many more potential acquirers. So I dismiss that slide, if you will, and suggest don't put that slide in the deck.
Sure.
Now, having said that, if you are a first-time founder, a new founder, I also would caution you about starting a company in an industry or vertical that you have not been in for a while and you do not understand. I've done that. I've made that mistake, by the way. It's an unpleasant mistake because you think, well, I'm smart. I'll work hard. I'm going to fix that industry. And very often the industry kicks you in the butt. So, and the reason I'm saying this is because if you are a first-time founder, but you understand the industry, you already understand the ecosystem enough to speak intelligently about who might care about your company and want to acquire it. I don't need it on a slide in a pitch deck, but it becomes a discussion about, oh, this person actually understands the vertical, they understand the ecosystem, they understand the players, they understand the competition, not just who might acquire it. They understand maybe the problem more deeply. So I think first-time founders, again, it's just the risk of going into an industry or a vertical you don't understand it, but people do it. I'm not suggesting you can't do it. You're just increasing the difficulty level. It's like playing a video game at, you know, the basic level where you can never get killed, to like the level where when you have one life. You're somewhere in the middle where you die and you can spawn back, right, and just keep going. So
That's right.
So that's how I think about that part. I also would say, like you touched on venture capital. Venture capital shouldn't be the default for people. I think it is, and I understand why, and it sounds awesome and it sounds cool, but most companies are not well suited to raising capital. And I think a lot of founders can get caught up in the hype, get caught up in the, you know, maybe the reputational boost that you get from saying I've raised venture capital, as opposed to going and building a great company. Now, again, you need money to build a company at some, like the money has to come from somewhere. You can self-fund it to a certain extent, friends and family, angel investors, there might be alternative sources of capital. But I think the venture capital model is really not designed for most businesses, and it can, in fact, lead you in the wrong direction. I've also lived that experience where I've worked at companies that ended up raising enormous amounts of, like large, like $30 million. It's a lot of money. And then spent a lot of money growing very quickly, hiring lots of people, feeling the pressure to grow at all costs, and then right, and then they crash. So I would caution you against being like, I have to go raise venture capital. I would much rather, again, I'm not suggesting take all your money, spend it all on your business, remortgage your house, you know, whatever it is. Like, you have to be careful about that, but at the same time, don't get caught in that hype of these wild success stories of people raising, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the way, a lot of founders that raise enormous amounts of capital, when those businesses exit, they don't walk away with that much money.
That's right. That's right.
They don't. So that's, you got to be careful about that.
So following on to what you have shared, which is brilliant, I think lots of fresh founders should take note of. Now, for let's say for those serial founders or serial entrepreneurs, now, you know, they've done other businesses before, but not necessarily have built, you know, a tech startup. And then, you know, these days a tech SaaS startup, it's, you know, it's appealing. Almost everyone now wants to get into this space because there's money ready to fund this, right? So how then would such founders start to think about the kind of valuation that they should, you know, raise at? Then also in this exercise of, you know, data-driven business scaling approach, how then do you align, you know, like, because almost everybody has the same amount of time. If you're an Ivy League founder, or you're from, you know, Southeast Asia, where we're currently based at, if you're a low performer, high performer, you know, at every funding round, almost everybody have the same amount of time. So in this fixed amount of time period, you know, it depends on how fast you could reach your KPIs, right? Your target. So then how then do such founders, you know, sort of like balance this? Oh, I need to raise a lot of money because, you know, it's good, you know, I can have more money at my reserve, you know, it's a good valuation. Even my early backers would appreciate that, to like, really, how much can I really achieve this goals, this target? How would you advise on that?
So what I would say on fundraising is, so of course, most folks, you know, the market these days on fundraising is more challenging. So I think that's, you know, part of just the global economy. Deals are still getting done, but it's a little bit tougher. I always think about fundraising as help. I have to figure out the amount of money that I need to get to the next major milestone. So that now, what is the next major milestone? I mean, it can vary a great deal. In SaaS businesses, it's usually some kind of ARR, some annual recurring revenue metric. How quickly and how much capital do I need to get to 1 million in ARR? How much money and capital do I need to get to 5 million ARR? And then maybe 10 million. And those are sort of rough benchmarks. Now, I've seen startups get to 1 million ARR very quickly. I've seen them also 2-3 years. And by the way, back to the product market fit thing, some startups take 4 or 5 years, big ones, to get to product market fit. So time is a tricky one. It's like, yeah, there's some rough benchmarks there. But it's not like if you don't get to 1 million ARR in a year, you have a crappy business. No, it may be a little bit slower. You haven't figured out how to acquire customers. So I really think about how much do I need to hit key milestones. In a perfect world, you're always raising for about 18 months.
Yeah.
But that's also very difficult to do, right? Because a lot of people aren't hitting their targets now. And so they have to raise for a little bit less. Investors are a little bit nervous. When it comes to valuation, I think founders, particularly first-time founders, actually, I think tend to be too precious about valuation.
Yep.
So it's not that they're overinflating the value necessarily, because the valuation is one of those things that's it's only worth what people are willing to pay for it, by the way.
Yep.
The company is worth nothing.
That's right.
You just got to be real. It's worth zero, right? Nobody's
in the beginning.
Nobody's buying it. It's only when somebody buys it is it worth that amount of money. So
That's right.
the risk of a valuation that's too high, and we've seen this in the market now, is you can't grow into the valuation. So you've just launched your company, you have a few customers, and you raise at a $10 million valuation. So on paper, the company is worth $10 million. That's investors buying future value. They're saying, I think this company is going to get to 1 million or 2 million ARR really quickly. And I think the market is still hot. So 2 million ARR times 5 as a multiple, okay, the company could be worth on paper 10 million. But let's say now you go and you've been at it for a year and you don't get there. Well, now when you go to raise more money, but your value is already set at 10 million, but now people are saying, well, wait a second, the market's a little softer. You didn't really hit the milestones that we would normally think of. You didn't grow into the valuation. So now I'm going to give you more money, but I'm going to give it to you at a $6 million valuation. And now you're getting crammed down. So I think valuation is this balance between how much dilution can I really give up? How confident am I that I can grow into this valuation so that I can get to that next set of milestones and raise at a higher valuation, versus how much of the company am I giving up too early, and how does that make me feel? So it's a balancing act. There's no perfect number for people, but I would caution against raising at these high numbers and then not achieving. There are a lot of down rounds happening today, which is basically capital going in at a lower valuation than the last capital that was going in. And that's because founders did not get to where they needed to go because they set the bar too high.
And does this also mean that founders should be aware of the sort of fund size these VCs are managing? Because some of these VCs are managing large funds, therefore, they need, a big returns to their LPs, and therefore they will require higher KPIs, from their founders, as opposed to, smaller funds. But a lot of times, fresh founders are only attracted to big funds because these are the only big names that they've heard of. They've all heard of Sequoia, they've all heard of Excel, and Kleiner Perkins and whatnot, but no one's really heard of the smaller indie funds. And sometimes these smaller indie funds, or like smaller funds generally, they've been around for a long time, and that to them it's a strategy for them to hit their marks. So how would you advise founders to think about in navigating around this environment?
Yeah, I think there is a certain cachet that comes with raising money from a well-known fund. You can't pretend that that's not true. Some reputation that comes from saying I raised from Sequoia or I raised from another big name fund. At the end of the day, money is money. And most investors who will claim that they provide value add, of course, but I would suggest that that sometimes that value add is 100% real. But by the way, it can come from smaller funds as well, who might be willing to roll up their sleeves more than a fund where you're just one of 100 companies that they've invested in, or they've written a small check in. So value add can be real, but sometimes value add's not real, i.e., might not get an enormous amount of value from the VC. And there's no guarantee that just because they're a top name brand that you're going to get more value than from a smaller fund. And so money is money, right? I need $100 to build my business. I need $100. And I care where the money comes from, but I'm open-minded to other investors. So, I would say when you're raising capital, if you've decided that that's your approach, you do have to do your research into the market. Who invests in my industry and sector? What stage is their fund at? What size checks do they write? How do they invest? Like, you do need to do your research. You can, of course, look a lot of things up on the internet, but you can also talk to other founders. You look at the portfolios and you say, okay, here's a bunch of companies that this VC's invested in. I'm going to go reach out to those founders on LinkedIn and ask them what it was like. And founders tend to be very willing to help other founders.
That's right.
And so you do have to go do your research. My feeling on founders and VCs is, I think you take away as much of the pedigree related things as possible. Like, do I think founders from any one specific university or city are infinitely better than founders from anywhere else in the world? I do not. One of the companies that I worked at, called Go Instant, was based in Halifax. I don't know how many people on this call know where Halifax is, but it's the eastern part of Canada on the ocean. It's beautiful. It's 400,000 people, and I'm stretching it, right? It is not Silicon Valley.
It sounds like Brunei, where I'm at.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, so it's not a mega hub. But the founders were awesome. We built an interesting product, and we were able to sell it. So I fundamentally believe companies can be built anywhere in the world. Is it a little bit more difficult in some places? 100% that's true. But do I care if the founder came, from Stanford, or do I care that the founder lives in San Francisco? I do not. And I think the same is true about VCs, is how I would think about it. Find the right partner for you. By the way, breaking up with a VC is harder than breaking up with a life partner. It's certainly
that's right.
Than breaking up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So I'm just you're like, when people say the analogy is like getting married, it's
worse.
More locked in than getting married. By the way, I've been married a long time, very happy. But my point being, it's much harder to break up. So you really got to
do your research.
You have to.
Right. Wonderful. And so with all that you've shared, and we're sort of running out of our time, we're entering our Q&A session now, and I've already seen a couple of questions being raised. So in all that we've talked about over the past 30 minutes or so, would you say that it would be challenging to build a high growth startup or innovative business if we're not utilizing a data-driven building approach, like basically building in the dark? You're not mapping out the system flow like you have shared, like just basically going with the gut feel and just thinking that, I'll just do what I think it's right. I just need to just focus on just getting the money in and control my burn. And that, to me, that is all, but I don't really need to care about the rest. Do you? Well,
yeah, the magic for me is get data and gut. It's balancing the combination. Using one to an extreme is not going to work. Because if you do everything by data, you're over analyzing, usually at the early stage, a small amount of data points. And what that tells me is you actually don't have the vision and the conviction around the business that you're building. The way I would describe this very quickly is you have to have a vision for what you're trying to achieve. And this is at the very top. That vision should not change. How you get there, 100% can change. And that should be data driven. So you're using data and intellectually honest decision-making to work your way like this to achieve a vision that you believe the world needs to have this thing in it.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. Right. So we've now entered into our Q&A session. And we've got 3 anonymous questions being posted here on the Zoom. So the first one would be, how should startups adapt their analytics approach as they progress through different stages of growth?
Yeah. So I think as I sort of map those stages, and again, I know I did that very, very quickly. Your approach changes because what you're focused on changes. So again, when I'm at that stickiness phase, I'm mostly focused on usage data. Are people using the product, and is usage a signal of value? And a lot of the data is still qualitative, but I'm able to now use quantitative data. As I go to the virality stage, the area I'm still using data, of course, but the things I'm focused on are different. So which channel is the most effective at converting high quality users or customers? How much am I maybe paying to acquire those customers? But now I still have to look at the usage, right? Because I might acquire a bunch of customers and then they churn, and that means that was a waste of time. So I still always looking at usage, and then when I get to revenue, of course, I'm looking more at revenue metrics. So in lean analytics, I talk about sort of this layering of data. At the project, I'm working on an experiment or a project. I've got some KPI for that project, but then that has to bubble up to some other metric that matters for the company. And then that probably has to bubble up to another metric that actually matters, which becomes the signal of the health of the business. So it's sort of these layers of metrics. And then as the business evolves, I start to shift the focus onto different KPIs.
Got it. And the next question is sort of related. All 3 are related. I have a feeling this is from one person. So what are some recommended tools for startups to collect and analyze the data with using your lean analytics principle?
Yeah, it's interesting. I tend to be pretty tool agnostic. We at Highline Beta, we use Heap a lot because it's pretty good at like funnel tracking through product. What are people doing in the system? What were they doing before? How much are they doing of it, right? So we use Heap. Mixpanel, also sort of similar in nature. This is mostly on the engagement side of things. You can also use Google Analytics for that. In my experience, it's gotten more and more complicated. So I go to simpler tools, but those are just examples of tools for me that I think are good at tracking engagement in a product.
Right. Okay. And so what are some common challenges that startups might face when implementing lean analytics, and how can they overcome these challenges?
Yeah, I think analytics in general, because it's relatively easy to track everything these days, I think the challenge that many people face is they get overwhelmed by the data. I'm collecting all of this information, but I really don't know what to do with the information. And that's where the principles of lean analytics become important, because our argument would be simplify, simplify, simplify. Collect all the data because you never know when it might be valuable for you. And there's examples in the book of people collecting a bunch of data and then being able to analyze the data and learn from the data. But for me, it's not a challenge of collection, it's a challenge of focus. So think about, how do I use data? Just try to think about, again, I like the systems diagram because it just tells me, okay, where in here, if I could fix one thing, what should I fix?
Mm,
and then let me put all of my energy into fixing that thing and measuring that thing, and then go to the next thing. And so we describe analytics as a squeeze toy. You know, the stress
mm.
balls, you
Yep.
know, you squeeze here and it bubbles up over here. That's
Yep.
how analytics work. I focus over here, I squeeze there, and then the next
There's a
problem is over
effect.
here.
Correct.
It's just going from one problem to the next and trying to be systematic about it
Mm,
and not getting overwhelmed. I think generally
right.
for founders, that's probably, it has nothing to do with analytics even. It's just the notion of I've got a million things to do. I only have X hours in the day.
Mm,
I'm struggling to prioritize because I don't know what thing is going to move the needle the most.
mm,
So it's like, how do I focus, get one thing done, and try to be, everybody will be familiar with the scientific method. You know,
mm,
we all learned it in school at some point. It's
mm,
trying to apply a little bit of the rigor of the scientific method. What's the
mm,
hypothesis? What's the test? What's the result?
mm,
And if I just keep doing that quickly, because
mm.
the only competitive advantage startups really have is speed.
That's right.
So
That's right.
long-winded answer to the question, but that's also the challenge. Like, I got a million things to do. I have all this data. What the heck do I do? Well,
Mm,
what's the riskiest assumption I have right now that I
mm,
have to get right? What experiment can I run? How do I measure that? What were the results?
mm.
And if I just do that quickly over and over and over and over again, you will get to good answers.
Right. So you mentioned a book a couple of times, and obviously there's a lot of golden nuggets there, I'm pretty sure. So for those of us who are not in the region where you're at, how can we purchase your book internationally? I mean, do you is it also available in digital format, like easily available on
It is in
Kindle?
digital. It is in digital format. It was translated into 9 languages.
Right.
If anybody messages me,
Mm,
here's what I'll do. If anybody signs up for my newsletter on here's what on Focus Chaos, and then sends me a note from the same email address and says I subscribe, I will send them the ebook for free.
nice. Yeah, I've heard you from this event, and I would like to get this book, and you'll give it for free.
Why
Nice.
not? Why not? Like, the book is, by the way, the book was published 10 years ago.
Right.
So what's interesting about that is that many of the case studies are outdated. Many of the companies that we did case studies don't even exist anymore. Some do, like Airbnb, but many don't
Right.
even exist.
Right.
But principles of the book still hold true.
Mm,
So, you know, but the book is from 10 years ago. But I will send somebody the ebook if they subscribe to my newsletter and then send me a message. I'm happy to do that. But yes, you
right.
can buy it digitally on Amazon. I would prefer people don't search for it and get the pirated versions. That's
Right.
all I would ask.
Of course, to support your hard work for this.
Don't cheat. I'll give it to you for free. Don't cheat. That's it.
And if people would like to get in whole, well, you have shared your email, so obviously you're available, you know, if someone wants to engage you for some workshop, whether it's to be done verbally, virtually, or, you know, they could fly you in if they're nearby you.
100%. Yeah. Here's the contact info again for everybody. I know
Mm,
I shared this very quickly, but by all means, anybody, please connect with me on LinkedIn, on X. That's
mm,
my work email address. By all means, like, connect
mm.
with me anytime. And then actually, yeah, please, like, just always happy to chat with founders and entrepreneurs or others that are, you know, trying to do things in startup ecosystems.
Yep. So yeah, for those who are listening, if you would like to have easy access to Ben's LinkedIn, just go, because, you know, if you found outside, if you're looking at our conference program from outside, actually Ben's name, it's actually hyperlinked to his LinkedIn. So just click that and just get connected with Ben. Now, I believe we're a bit running early with our time, and there's no more questions. But if anyone's listening from our live Facebook live, you know, if there's any questions, just throw them in the Facebook comment box, and yeah, we'll just post this to Ben. So yeah, Ben, I do have some personal questions that I have, since, you know, we've still got time. So what made you write the book with Alistair?
Yeah, it's interesting. So right before we wrote the book, we co-founded with two other founders Year
Mm,
One Labs.
mm,
And Year One Labs was a very, very early stage incubate. We didn't call it a venture studio at the time because we weren't
mm,
familiar with that term,
mm,
but we built and funded 5 businesses.
mm,
And from the earliest stages, take an idea, take a founder, put two founders together. We were doing everything, but what was interesting was Lean Startup
mm.
was just emerging. Eric Ries was
Yep,
writing content about Lean Startup. His book
yep.
was coming out. And when I read Lean Startup, I remember thinking, oh my God, he wrote this book for me.
Mm,
Obviously, Eric Ries did not write the book for me, but that's how I felt because I had
right.
built this before and made all the bloody mistakes he was talking about.
Yep.
So we took Lean Startup methodology and applied it in Year One Labs. So we
Mm,
had this sort of methodology that
mm,
we were putting people through, validate the problem through interviews and customer development and discovery, build an MVP. And we were learning about applying Lean Startup. And what we found was, because it was new,
mm,
it was somewhat theoretical to us.
mm,
Um, Alistair is really a data person.
mm.
I'm a product person, and we said, well, what if we could make Lean Startup less theoretical and more
Practical.
analytical, more
Analytical, right.
prescriptive? Not
Yep,
prescriptive, like here's the formula to win,
right.
but give people more meat on the bones of
Yep.
this concept, which when you read it, you're like, oh my God, what was I doing before? So
Mm,
that's why we wrote the book,
mm.
was because we're living the Lean Startup principles and wanted to expand on the body of knowledge through our own experience.
Right. Understand. So with what you're doing now at Highline Beta, it's a venture studio, right?
Studio, yeah.
Yep. And how do companies, if let's say, because I think this is a relatively still young concept in Southeast Asia, if there are companies who, are interested, if let's say they would like to get in touch with you to understand more how they could start a program within, their corporation, what are some primer you could say to them from this?
Yeah. Highline Beta, I started the company with a co-founder 7 years ago, learned a lot. Our model, and we've iterated the model and experimented with different things. And one part of our model is working with corporate partners to help them build new ventures. Oftentimes they don't spin those ventures out into new companies, but sometimes they do. But the idea is, how do we help big companies innovate outside of their core business? So, we're not necessarily the company that goes in and helps somebody incrementally improve their product.
Right.
We're more the team that would go in and say, well, where are the new growth engines going to come from? Where are the new customer opportunities or the new markets that you might want to explore? And maybe we need to build new businesses adjacent to your core business. And so that's how we started Highline Beta. And again, sometimes that leads to spinning out a company where a decision gets made to say, let's bring a founder in, actually create a new company, put capital into that company, and now they have their first customer or partner with that, large company.
Right.
Oftentimes a big company says, well, we want to build these new businesses, but keep them in-house. And that's also fine. So
right,
for
like a new product line.
Yeah, like a new product line, a new service. I often think about expansion opportunities that feed the core business.
Yep.
So let's say I'm a bank, and we all know what banks do, and they have all banks have basically the same thing, like consumer banks, right?
Yep.
Credit cards, bank accounts, loans,
checking,
savings accounts. And we worked with a bank in Canada, RBC, Royal Bank of Canada, to build new businesses beyond what they called beyond banking. So these businesses that solve problems for consumers and business owners before they needed banking. The idea being is, if I could interact with you and create value for you more than I do with my business banking account or my consumer checking account, which, you get value, but obviously the bank doesn't interact with me every day. If I can create other types of value for you, you will have a stronger affinity to me, the bank. And if I can create value for you before you're even a bank customer, maybe I can move you from this value. So an example would be work we did in the home space. So most banks do mortgages. How do you get more market share in mortgages? Well, you help people find a home. So RBC built a tool to help you with home search and a variety of other things. But the idea there is when you decide you want to buy a home, the first thing you think about, or you might not say, well, the first thing I need to do is talk to a bank and get a mortgage. No, the first thing you do is start browsing cool looking houses.
Yep.
Right.
That's right.
Like you start dreaming about that kitchen or that whatever it is that you want. So how do I, as a business, interact with you in a different part of the customer journey before you need that core product or service that I offer? That's in principle what building new ventures outside the core means.
Wonderful. Thank you for that explanation there. So Ben, I think unfortunately we've, this can go on and on, but our time is up. So if you could leave one practical advice to a pre-seed founder in the very early stage, especially those first-time founder, what would it be?
Yeah, I think you really have to find a problem that actually matters, where you really have validated that problem is real, that the problem is painful, and people are looking for a solution. That is trickier to do in consumer, easier to do in B2B, but I think a lot of founders skip they ask 5 friends, do you think that's a cool idea? That's not validating it. Everything gets anchored on the problem. If you got that wrong, you can build a product. Building the software is not the hard part. Raising money might not even be the hard part because you could convince somebody to fund it. But everything will fail if you haven't solved a real problem. So I would encourage people to really spend the time evaluating that part of the equation.
Right. Thank you. Very, very good advice. Thank you, Ben. We appreciate your time. I know it's evening on your end. So take care, and hopefully we'll catch you again next time in our future virtual events.
Yes. Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for attending. I appreciate it. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.